In 9, dog stops a girl from entering. School bus, but Woody sensed no human could explain. It happened in less than a minute, but what Axel did that morning changed everything. The sky was painted in soft grays, a typical Wednesday in late autumn. Leaves swirled along the sidewalks as the wind whispered across. Maple Street. Emily Harper, 13 years old, adjusted the straps on her backpack and glanced down at the German Shepherd at her side. "Come on, Axel," she said, casually, stepping off the curb toward the waiting school bus. The yellow vehicle sat idling at the corner of Maple and 9th, its doors creaking open with a mechanical sigh. The driver did not wave or nod, just stared straight ahead behind a tinted windshield. Emily had one foot on the first step when Axel lunged with sudden, jarring force that nearly knocked her backward. He sank his teeth into the hem of her denim skirt and yanked hard. Emily shrieked and stumbled, landing on one knee. Her backpack shifted in a sharp corner jabbed into her ribs. "What the heck, Axel?" she cried, twisting around to face him. He did not bark. He did not growl. Axel crouched low, trembling, his ears pinned flat against his skull. His eyes were locked on the bus, not like a dog ready to attack, but like one who had seen something it could not explain and was terrified by it. Emily turned back to the vehicle. The driver had not moved. His hands remained fixed on the wheel, his head still. No reaction, no acknowledgement that a child had fallen just inches from his bus. His face, though partially obscured by oversized sunglasses, seemed wrong, like it lacked depth, like it belonged to a mannequin posed in a driver's uniform. The bus doors closed with a hiss, and the vehicle slowly pulled away from the curb. Without her, its engine rumbled down the road until it disappeared behind the trees, leaving behind only the fading echo of its wheels. Emily sat frozen on the pavement, her skirt torn, her palm scraped, and Axel still trembling at her side. He crept toward her, licking her wrists softly as if to apologize, though his body remained rigid with tension. "What is wrong with you today?" she whispered, looking into his eyes. But there was no mischief in them, no guilt, only alertness, fear, and something else. Something Emily could not name, but felt deep in her chest like a cold, crawling warning. She stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her knees, and slung her backpack back onto her shoulder. The street was quiet again, ordinary, familiar, yet nothing felt the same. Axel did not take his eyes off the road. His tail remained low, unmoving. Emily reached down and ran her fingers through his thick fur, only now noticing the way his muscles were coiled tight beneath his skin, as though he were still waiting for what she did not know. That was the moment everything changed. The moment her loyal dog, once just a comforting companion, became something else entirely. Not a pet, not just a protector, but the only living being who seemed to understand that the thing waiting behind the wheel of that bus was not something any human could explain. Emily had been living with her grandmother, Marlene, for 6 months. When Axel came into their lives after the divorce, her parents had each moved away, separate cities, separate priorities. The courts had ruled in favor of stability, and stability meant the quiet yellow house on Maple Street where Marlene grew tomatoes, listened to classical music on vinyl, and believed strongly in handwritten letters. Axel had arrived from the city's police department just 2 weeks after Emily moved in. He was a retired K-9 unit, a 10-year-old German Shepherd with a history longer than some officers. He had sniffed out narcotics in warehouses, tracked fugitives through swamps, and once pulled a child from under a collapsed stairwell during an earthquake response. Now he was retired, calm, obedient, and according to the paperwork, recommended for non-strenuous adoption due to age and loyalty. From the moment Emily met him, something clicked. She had never owned a dog. Before, never even considered herself a dog person. But Axel was not just a dog. He did not demand affection. He offered presents, whether she was brushing her teeth, doing homework, or reading late. At night, Axel was always there, silent, steady. A warm shape curled at her feet or stretched beneath her desk. Sometimes he would rest his chin on her notebook as she wrote, watching her with those amber eyes that seemed too knowing for. And Anna, Arlene, had noticed at first. He's not watching you like a dog. Watches, she once said softly, pouring herself a cup of tea. It's more like he's remembering something. The morning after the bus incident, the phone began ringing. 2 voicemails, one from a neighbor, one from the local Homeowners Association president, Mrs. Trudy. By the time Emily returned from walking to school alone, word had already spread. I heard the Harper girl's dog attacked her. Someone had whispered at the diner. Those canine snaps sometimes, PTSD, they say. You never really know what trauma a dog carries. Emily had walked into the kitchen, dropped her bag on the floor, and sat down at the table. Axel followed, quiet and obedient, settling at her feet with a soft sigh. He didn't mean it. Grandma, she said. I know, sweetheart, Marlene replied, setting a glass of iced tea in front of her, but her hands trembled slightly as she poured, a detail Emily did not miss. Marlene was not a woman prone to panic. She checked weather radars before rainstorms and kept a crank powered radio in the hallway closet just in case. But that day her unease was visible. She leaned across the table and said, I asked Carol to send me the ring. Footage from her front porch. I wanted to see it for myself. They watched the video together. It showed Emily walking to the bus, Axel lunging, pulling her back just in time. But what caught their breath was not the dog's behavior. It was the man behind the wheel. He did not flinch, did not move, even when Emily fell. And as the video was paused, zoomed, and replayed, they saw it. A flicker across his face, a brief distortion, like a bad rendering in a video game. That's not a face, Marlene whispered. It's a mask or something, trying to be human and failing. Emily looked at Axel, curled at her feet. He met her eyes, then looked away. He had known. 3 hours after Marlene called the local precinct officer Luis, Rodriguez knocked on their front door. He was young, polite, and sharp-eyed, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. He stood tall in his uniform, notepad in one hand, and offered a kind but serious expression as he stepped into the living room. Ma'am, he said, after introductions, I reviewed the footage from your neighbor's ring. Camera, I'd like to see it again with you if Emily sat beside Marlene on the couch, Axel lying quietly at her feet. Rodriguez played the video on Marlene's laptop. Silence filled the room as they watched. Emily stepping toward the bus, Axel lunging, the skirt tearing, Emily falling, and the driver still rigid, lifeless. Rodriguez leaned in. May I? He asked and took control of the laptop. He paused the video, zoomed in on the driver's face. That's strange, he muttered. There's no motion here at all. No blink, no shoulder twitch. Nothing. It's like a mannequin. Marlene finished. He nodded thoughtful. Let me take a copy of this and run it through some image analysis software. I'll be back as soon as I have something. When he returned, his face had changed. Less calm, more urgent. There is no match in our DMV database for this man, Rodriguez said. I ran facial recognition, checked transit, employee records, even scanned retired, driver profiles. Nothing. It's like he doesn't exist. And the bus? Marlene asked. That's the part that worries. Me, he said. The license plate isn't tied to any school transportation system, not active, not decommissioned. As far as our records show, that vehicle was never registered and it never arrived at any school. It disappeared. From GPS tracking one block after your corner, Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Then who was driving it? Rodriguez didn't answer. Instead, he looked down at Axel, who stood the moment the officer raised a laptop. Again, Axel stepped between Emily and the screen, ears forward, tail stiff, not aggressive, protective. May I suggest we escalate this? Rodriguez asked quietly. I know someone in Homeland Security, someone who handles anomalies. The next morning, Agent Monroe arrived. She wore black windbreaker with the Homeland Security emblem on the chest, her hair pulled tight into a bun and her posture as rigid as her expression. I am Agent Monroe, Cyber Threat Division. She said, we believe your granddaughter may have been the subject of a targeting attempt by a non-conventional surveillance entity. Marlene narrowed her eyes. That sounds like a whole lot of words, for we do not know what the hell is going on. That is accurate, Monroe replied without blinking. She set up a secure laptop on the dining room table, typing in a string of encrypted codes. A video still appeared on the screen. The bus, the driver, the glitch. Monroe paused at frame 22 and zoomed in on the driver's face. Right here, she said. This is not a face. It is a projection, a synthetic layer over a biometric void. Emily's voice shook. Then what was driving it? That is what we are trying to determine, Monroe said, but it's not the first time. She brought up a map. Red pins marked towns across the country, isolated communities, small districts. In each of these places, a child disappeared near a transportation site, bus stops, ride, share pickup zones, subway entrances. In nearly every case, the vehicles were unregistered, surveillance footage, glitched, no leads until now. She turned back to Emily. You were not just lucky. Something was watching. Something expected you to get on that bus and your dog. He interrupted the pattern. Emily looked at Axel. He stood at her side, head low, eyes steady, guarding her. Again, Monroe continued. When we ran your name through our encrypted databases, something else came up. She tapped another key. A redacted document appeared on screen. DARPA Experimental Initiative E92. Subject Harper E. What is that? Emily whispered. A discontinued government program, Monroe said. Early neural mapping behavior analysis. The document suggests you were enrolled as an infant. Unusual sensory processing. Exceptional memory patterns. Marlene leaned forward, stunned. I never heard of anything like this. Most parents who enrolled their children were given vague descriptions, cognitive development, studies, long-term education research. But there is more. Monroe clicked again. A second file opened. Subject E92. Displayed intense emotional bonds to only one test subject. K9 unit, ID, K9001A. Emily's voice trembled. Axel? Yes, Monroe said. This dog was part of the program. After DARPA shuttered the project, the K9 was transferred to the city's police unit under a new identity. His file was flagged. Unbreakable bond. To subject E92. Do not separate. Axel stepped forward and placed his paw gently on Emily's knee. She reached down, pressing her hand over his. Then, he remembered me, she said, even when I didn't. Monroe nodded. And that may be why you're still here. They left before. Dawn in a black SUV with no plates. Headlights off as it moved along the abandoned forestry roads outside the city. The air was thick with fog, trees, pressing in on all sides like silent sentinels. Agent Monroe sat in the passenger seat, maps and thermal imaging, readouts flickering across the tablet on her lap. Officer Rodriguez drove with both hands tied on the wheel, his jaw set. In the back, Emily sat beside Axel, her fingers tangled in his fur. He was calm, focused, his breathing steady, but his eyes never stopped scanning the windows. We traced the last known signal to an abandoned data facility 20. North, Monroe said without turning around. It was decommissioned in 2017. No power, no employees, no digital footprint since, but last week it lit up. Sub-frequency pulses, high frequency, noise bursts. We think it's where the projection system is housed, and whatever's behind this, it wants you to come to it. Why? Emily asked. Because you broke the loop, Monroe replied. Now, it's trying to pull you back in. The facility loomed up from the forest floor, like a bunker swallowed by time. Gray, concrete walls, vines crawling over, shattered windows. The front doors hung, half open, darkness yawning beyond them. They entered silently. The air inside was unnaturally cold, though the scanners picked up no movement. As they moved deeper, Rodriguez tossed glow sticks into halls ahead, casting dim green light over walls covered in dust and tangled wires. Then they reached the first room. Emily froze. It was her bedroom, not the one she slept in now, but the one from when she was 5. The same pink walls, the crooked bookshelf, the worn-out stuffed rabbit sitting on the bed. There was even a picture of her and her mother beside the nightlight. The smell of lavender drifted through the air, familiar, haunting. Axel stepped forward, sniffed, and then growled, a low, uneasy rumble. "This is not real," Emily whispered. "It's a reconstruction," Monroe said, scanning the room with her device. "Some kind of memory mapping interface tied to you." They kept moving, room after room, shifted into different fragments of Emily's past, the hospital corridor, where her parents told her they were, separating, the daycare hallway where she had her first panic attack, her 7th birthday party, except the faces of the guests were wrong, too smooth, too identical. Each time she hesitated, Axel nudged her forward, breaking the illusion when the hallucinations thickened, when the walls started breathing and voices began whispering. Her name, Axel barked, sharp, jarring, enough to reset her mind. Then they reached the chamber. At the center of a vast circular room was a pedestal. On it sat a pulsing cube of pale blue light, cables running from it into the ceiling and floor. Around it, walls flickered, with images of Emily at different ages, laughing, crying, sleeping. Dozens of versions of her overlapping like glitching holograms. "This is the core," Monroe said. "It is not just recording you, it is rehearsing you, repeating you." Emily stepped closer. On one screen, she saw herself stepping onto the bus, but the image stuttered, her body pixelated, her face twisting into something unfamiliar before resetting. "It is trying to keep me here," Emily whispered, like a loop, a memory that cannot finish. "It is not a trap," Monroe said. "It is a demand for emotional surrender. If you accept the past it, presence, you stay. But the past it's showing isn't mine anymore," Emily said, quietly. "It is not real. Axel stepped. Beside her, eyes locked on the cube. He let out a short, deliberate bark. Emily nodded. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old photograph, one her grandmother had given her weeks ago. It showed Emily holding Axel for first time, both younger, both smaller. She pressed it against the cube. I remember. This, she said, not because you showed it to me, but because I lived it, and you can't fake that. The cube flickered, the wall spasmed. Images shuddered violently. Sparks jumped from the wires as the system over. Axel barked again, louder. The lights exploded. The floor buckled beneath them. Get out! Monroe shouted. They ran through the shaking corridors, smoke and sparks filling the air. Rodriguez led the way, Monroe behind him. Axel flanked Emily, his body pressed against her leg. Then from behind them, a burst of heat. The wall collapsed. Shrapnel flew. Axel yelped. Emily turned. Blood. A piece of metal had sliced across his flank. Axel, she screamed, dropping to her knees. He did not fall. He stood, trembling but steady, his body blocking hers from falling debris. Rodriguez ran back, grabbed Emily by the shoulders. We have to move. He can make it. With Monroe's help, they lifted Axel slightly and guided him forward, step by agonizing step through the final tunnel and out into the open air. Behind them, the facility collapsed in silence. No explosion, just eraser. Later, as paramedics treated. Axel's wound in the mobile command van. Monroe stood beside Emily. It is gone, she said, but I do not believe it is. Dead. Emily looked down at Axel. His side was bandaged. He lay with his head on her lap, tail thumping once with effort. It is not dead, Emily said. It is waiting, but next time it will not be. Enough to know who I am. She stroked Axel's ear gently. Next time it will know who he is, too. Autumn returned quietly to Maple Street. The days grew shorter, but the afternoons were soft and golden, the kind of light that made the edges of everything seem gentler. Emily Harper no longer looked over her shoulder when she stepped outside. There were no more false buses, no strange figures in sunglasses, no flickering screens playing loops of her life. That part was over. Axel had recovered slowly, but surely the wound along his flank had required stitches and rest. But he bore the scar like a soldier, calm, dignified, unchanged his devotion. He walked with her again, slower than before, but just as steady. His new vest, Reed K9 Hero, a title officially granted by the city's police department 2 weeks after the collapse of the false facility. The story had been redacted in the press. Malfunctioning surveillance experiment, they said. Interagency cooperation effort concluded, but within their small town, word had spread. People no longer questioned Axel's instincts. They no longer whispered about the day he lunged and bit Emily's skirt. They called him a hero now, and they were right. At the annual rescue animal combination ceremony, Emily was asked to speak. She stood behind a wooden podium set up in front of the courthouse, her voice trembling only slightly as she looked out at the small crowd of townspeople, officers, and handlers. You can't really repay a dog, she began. They do not ask for thank yous. They do not write letters. They do not need medals. What they give is not something you can balance with a gesture or a gift. She looked down at Axel, who sat just below the stage, his eyes on her, ears alert. But this one, she said, this one never let me forget who I was. Even when something else tried to rewrite that story, A soft hush passed through the audience. He remembered me. She continued, her voice softer now, even when I didn't. Axel's tail gave a single wag. Emily smiled in the crowd, clapped, not the kind of applause that ends quickly, but the warm kind, the grateful kind, the kind that says, "We saw this and it meant something." Afterward, she knelt beside him and whispered, "We're okay now." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long golden shadows, across the lawn, Emily and Axel walked together down the sidewalk behind their house. The wind rustled through the maple leaves above, and the street was quiet, peaceful. There was no more fear. In Emily's steps, she did not scan the sky for drones. She did not wait for something to return. She walked like someone who had stepped through something dark and had come out on the other side holding something bright. Axel kept pace at her side. He did not lead. He did not follow. He simply walked with her stride for stride, just as he always had. They were not just girl and dog. They were a team forever. Thank you for following Emily and Axel's extraordinary journey. A story not just of danger and mystery, but of loyalty, memory, and the unbreakable bond between a girl and her dog. In a world that tried to erase her, Axel stood firm, not just as a protector, but as a reminder of who she truly was. And sometimes that's all we need. Someone who remembers us when we forget ourselves. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet courage our animals show every day, then please consider subscribing to Amazing Paws Stories.